George Eliot's The Mill on the Floss, published in 1860, is a rich and profound novel that examines complex themes such as family loyalty, societal expectations, personal growth, and the tensions between individual desires and social obligations. The novel, set in the early 19th century in the fictional English town of St Ogg's, follows the lives of siblings Tom and Maggie Tulliver as they navigate their tumultuous childhood, adolescence, and eventual tragedy. With its deep psychological insight and Eliot's characteristic realism, The Mill on the Floss stands as one of the most enduring works of Victorian literature.
Overview of the novel.
The story is set around Dorlcote Mill, a water-powered mill owned by the Tulliver family. Mr. Tulliver, an impulsive and proud man, runs the mill and has high hopes for his son Tom, who he dreams will receive a better education and social status than he himself has achieved. Meanwhile, Maggie, Tom's younger sister, is an intelligent, emotional and free-spirited girl who struggles to fit into the rigid societal norms of her time. From childhood, Tom and Maggie's relationship is central to the novel. Tom is practical and emotionally reserved, while Maggie is imaginative and passionate. Their lives are disrupted when Mr. Tulliver loses a lawsuit to the shrewd lawyer Wakeham, plunging the family into financial ruin. The Tullivers lose their mill, and Tom is forced to quit his schooling and work to help pay off their debts. Meanwhile, Maggie's sensitive nature and yearning for intellectual and emotional fulfillment lead her into personal and social conflicts, particularly in her relationships with Philip Wakeham, the son of the family's enemy, and Stephen Guest, a charming but unsuitable suitor. As the novel progresses, Maggie and Tom's bond is repeatedly tested by external events and their own evolving personalities. The climactic moment of reconciliation between the siblings occurs in the midst of a devastating flood, which symbolises the larger forces beyond their control. In the end, the flood sweeps them both to their deaths, uniting them tragically in death as they could not be united in life.
Thematic analysis.
The individual versus society.
One of the central themes in The Mill on the Floss is the conflict between individual desires and the constraints imposed by society. This tension is most powerfully embodied in the character of Maggie Tulliver, whose intellectual curiosity, emotional depth, and independent spirit clash with the expectations of a patriarchal and conservative society. Throughout the novel, Maggie's struggle for self-expression and fulfillment is thwarted by societal norms that dictate how women should behave. Her desire for knowledge, her friendship with Philip Wakeham, and her passionate attraction to Stephen Guest all place her at odds with the moral codes of her community. Society judges Maggie harshly for her emotional and intellectual desires, and she is ultimately ostracised for actions that are perceived as breaches of female propriety. Eliot, through Maggie, explores the painful limitations placed on women during the Victorian era, particularly those who did not conform to traditional roles of passivity and submission. Maggie's tragic fate reflects Eliot's critique of the rigid social structures of her time. While Maggie's ultimate downfall is precipitated by external forces, the flood, her life's trajectory is shaped by the social pressures that deny her the opportunity to be her true self. In this sense, The Mill on the Floss can be seen as a deeply feminist novel, examining the cost of personal freedom in a repressive society.
Family loyalty and conflict.
The complex dynamics of family loyalty are central to The Mill on the Floss. The Tulliver family's fate is shaped by their devotion to one another, yet these familial bonds are also the source of deep conflict, particularly between Tom and Maggie. Tom, driven by a sense of duty to restore the family's honour after their financial ruin, becomes increasingly rigid and moralistic. His sense of responsibility towards the family's legacy often puts him at odds with Maggie, whose personal desires and emotional needs conflict with Tom's pragmatic worldview. Maggie's love for Tom is profound, but their relationship is fraught with misunderstanding and emotional distance. While Tom embodies the Victorian ideal of the self-made man, Maggie's emotional and intellectual complexity makes her a more nuanced and vulnerable character. The conflict between them represents the broader struggle between duty and desire, between familial loyalty and personal autonomy. Ultimately, The novel suggests that these tensions are irreconcilable in the world that Eliot depicts. At the same time, The Mill on the Floss also emphasises the importance of family ties. Despite the conflicts between Tom and Maggie, their bond remains unbreakable. The final reconciliation between the siblings during the flood is a poignant moment that underscores the novel's belief in the enduring power of family love, even in the face of insurmountable difficulties.
The role of education.
Education plays a critical role in shaping the destinies of Tom and Maggie, and Eliot uses their differing educational experiences to explore larger themes about class, gender, and personal development. Tom's education is largely practical and geared towards preparing him for the world of business and commerce. He struggles with academic subjects and is more comfortable with hands-on work, which reflects his pragmatic and action-oriented personality. In contrast, Maggie's intellectual and emotional development is stunted by the limited educational opportunities available to women of her class. Her desire for knowledge and spiritual growth is constantly thwarted, both by her family's financial difficulties and by societal expectations that women should be content with domestic duties. Maggie's frustration with her limited education is a source of great inner conflict, and it contributes to her sense of alienation from the world around her. Through Maggie's plight, Eliot critiques the limited educational opportunities for women in Victorian society. Maggie's intellectual potential is never fully realised, not because she lacks ability, but because the society in which she lives does not value or support her ambitions. Eliot's portrayal of Maggie's stifled genius serves as a broader commentary on the wasted potential of women who are denied the chance to develop their minds and pursue their passions.
The role of nature and the river.
The natural world, and particularly the imagery of the river, plays a symbolic role in The Mill on the Floss. The River Floss is both a literal and metaphorical force in the novel, representing the uncontrollable forces of nature and fate that shape the characters' lives. The river is a constant presence in the novel, flowing through the Tullivers' mill and their lives, symbolising both the continuity of life and the unpredictable, often destructive power of nature. The flood at the end of the novel serves as a powerful symbol of the uncontrollable forces that ultimately determine the fates of the characters. The flood represents the culmination of the emotional and social conflicts that have built up throughout the novel, sweeping away all the tensions and bringing a tragic resolution to Tom and Maggie's story. In this sense, the river serves as a metaphor for the larger forces, social, economic, and personal, that shape human lives in ways that individuals cannot fully control. At the same time, the river also symbolises the potential for renewal and change. For Maggie, the river is a source of solace and reflection, a place where she can momentarily escape from the pressures of her life and contemplate her deeper desires. In the end, however, the river's destructive power overwhelms any possibility of renewal, and Maggie's attempt to reconcile with Tom is cut short by their deaths.
Character analysis.
Maggie Tulliver.
Maggie Tulliver is the emotional and intellectual centre of The Mill on the Floss. Her passionate, impulsive nature sets her apart from the other characters in the novel, and she is often described as a wayward or unmanageable child. From a young age, Maggie displays a strong desire for knowledge and understanding, but her unconventional behaviour and emotional intensity often lead her into conflict with her family and society. Maggie's relationships with Philip Wakeham and Stephen Guest further illustrate her internal conflict. While Philip represents intellectual companionship and emotional depth, Stephen offers physical attraction and the promise of a romantic escape. However, Maggie's loyalty to her family and her sense of duty ultimately prevent her from fully pursuing either relationship. Throughout the novel, Maggie's character is marked by a deep sense of guilt and self-sacrifice. She often represses her own desires in order to fulfill the expectations of others, particularly her brother Tom. In the end, Maggie's tragic fate reflects her inability to reconcile her inner desires with the external demands of society. Her death in the flood can be seen as both a literal and symbolic resolution to her internal conflict, as she is finally reunited with her brother in a moment of emotional reconciliation.
Tom Tulliver.
Tom Tulliver is a character defined by his sense of duty, practicality, and emotional reserve. From a young age, Tom is portrayed as the responsible, dutiful son who is determined to restore the family's honour after their financial ruin. Unlike Maggie, Tom is not particularly intellectual or imaginative, but he is hard-working and determined to succeed in the world of business. Tom's relationship with Maggie is one of the most complex and fraught aspects of the novel. While he deeply loves his sister, he often finds it difficult to understand her emotional and intellectual needs. Tom's rigid moral code and sense of responsibility make him less sympathetic to Maggie's struggles, and he frequently judges her harshly for her actions. This tension between the siblings is a central driving force in the novel, and it reflects the broader conflict between duty and desire, as well as the challenges of familial loyalty. In the end, Tom's emotional reserve and sense of duty are both his strengths and his limitations. While he succeeds in restoring the family's financial stability, he is unable to fully connect with Maggie on an emotional level until the novel's tragic conclusion. Tom's death in the flood alongside Maggie serves as a poignant reminder of the complexities of their relationship and the unresolvable tensions between them.
Mr. and Mrs. Tulliver.
Mr. and Mrs. Tulliver represent two different approaches to life and family in the mill on the Floss. Mr. Tulliver is a proud, impulsive man who values independence and is determined to secure a better future for his children, particularly Tom. His decision to send Tom to school, despite the family's financial difficulties, reflects his desire for social mobility and his belief in the importance of education. However, Mr. Tulliver's impulsiveness and inability to navigate the legal and economic complexities of his world ultimately lead to the family's downfall. Mrs. Tulliver, on the other hand, is a more practical and conventional figure. She is concerned with maintaining the family's social status and preserving their material possessions. Unlike Mr. Tulliver, who is willing to take risks in the hope of achieving greater success, Mrs. Tulliver is more focused on stability and security. Her obsession with household goods and her constant fretting over the family's financial situation reflect her deep-seated fears about social decline. Together, Mr. and Mrs. Tulliver represent the conflicting desires for social advancement and security that shape the lives of the characters in the novel. Their contrasting personalities also highlight the broader themes of risk, responsibility, and the challenges of navigating a changing economic and social landscape.
Conclusion: the tragedy of the mill on the Floss.
The Mill on the Floss is a novel that explores the deep and often painful tensions between individual desires and social obligations, between familial loyalty and personal fulfillment, and between the forces of nature and human control. Through the story of Tom and Maggie Tulliver, Eliot examines the complexities of family relationships, the limitations of societal expectations, and the often tragic consequences of the conflict between duty and desire. At its heart, The Mill on the Floss is a deeply human story about the difficulties of growing up, the challenges of navigating the expectations of others, and the struggle to find one's place in a world that is often unforgiving and indifferent to individual dreams. The novel's tragic conclusion, with the deaths of Tom and Maggie, serves as a powerful reminder of the unpredictability of life and the uncontrollable forces that shape our destinies. George Eliot's masterful portrayal of the inner lives of her characters, combined with her keen social insight, makes The Mill on the Floss a timeless and resonant work that continues to speak to readers today. Through its exploration of family, society, and the human spirit, the novel offers a profound meditation on the complexities of life and the enduring power of love and loyalty, even in the face of tragedy.